Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, the desperate rush to leave Khartoum continues. Sudanese and foreigners take advantage of openings left by a delicate ceasefire to try to get out of the Sudanese capital, even as conflict continues to grip the nation. Also, an African child's killed by malaria every 60 seconds. The region suffers from 95% of all cases in the world. There is a worldwide push to completely wipe out the disease by 2030. We head to Guinea Gabon for a closer look at efforts there. And there's always time for a good book. In Conakry, 72 hours have been dedicated to literature annually for the last 15 years in a festival that attracts readers and writers from across the continent. And this year, the focus is on African identity. But first, streams of foreigners and Sudanese continued to surge out of Khartoum on Tuesday as a fragile new truce was tested by ongoing fighting. Despite continued clashes in the capital between armed forces backing rival generals, there was enough of a lull to allow for ramped-up evacuations. At least 459 people have been killed since fighting first broke out. As other countries kept up the push to get their nationals out, France said on Tuesday that its evacuation mission was finished, although a Navy vessel will stay off Port Sudan to try and help get people out. Bastien Renouy brings us more from Djibouti.
The French military evacuation operation in Khartoum is now over. All the planes are now back here in Djibouti, and most of the 500 foreigners who are evacuated will be flying to France tonight. But it doesn't mean that the French military's work is done yet, because there's still a French Navy ship in Port Sudan at the moment. It will be used by 500 members of the United Nations and their families to leave Sudan. Port Sudan has been considered as a safe city during the past days. It's under the control of the armies. There's been no fighting reported, so many foreign embassies are trying to send their staff in this city close to the Red Sea to try to evacuate their workers to Saudi Arabia. Jeddah is just a few hours away if they use a boat, but it doesn't mean that all the operations in Khartoum are over for every nation, because we learned today that both the United Kingdom and Spain are still sending planes to the same military base as the French did during the past days to evacuate their own citizens. But let's also think about all the Sudanese who are still stranded inside Khartoum. Millions of people do not have enough water, food, couldn't access electricity since the beginning of the fighting 11 days ago. And the only solution for these people to leave Khartoum is to find a bus or a car, which is still very difficult because of the intensity of the fighting. They say that they can still hear many explosions, many gunshots, and that the ceasefire is yet to be fully implemented.
Bastien Renouy there for us. Now, the UN Refugee Agency says that it's bracing for up to 270,000 displaced Sudanese to head to Chad and South Sudan. Thousands have already fled to Egypt. Karis Garland has more.
At this border crossing between Sudan and Egypt, a sudden influx of buses creates a long queue. Egypt is one of the main destinations for Sudanese people fleeing fighting. Intisar is one of them. The decision wasn't easy, but constant fear pushed her to leave with her husband and 3 children.
We couldn't take our own car. We had to ask for a taxi so we wouldn't be targeted and subject to violence. The taxi arrived, and even the driver himself was afraid.
Meanwhile, in Chad, a growing number of Sudanese refugees means huge demand for basic necessities. Sanitation is of particular concern as aid agencies seek to avoid waterborne diseases.
We have no water, no food, no mattresses to sleep. Some of us are sick and need medical attention. We can't go back because it's not safe.
The UN Refugee Agency says it's preparing for more arrivals in Chad despite the ceasefire.
For the moment, we are working with a 20,000 refugees operational figure, but we are planning for up to 100,000 worst-case scenario.
The UN is also bracing for an influx of people in South Sudan, including many returning to their home country. The total is expected to reach 170,000.
Well, Tuesday, 25th of April, marked World Malaria Day, an appointment to turn the spotlight onto the global effort to try and wipe out the deadly disease. It disproportionately affects sub-Saharan Africa, where 95% of the world's cases are found. About one African child dies of malaria every minute. But there has been enormous progress in preventing and treating it. Gabon and other countries are hoping to be malaria-free in under a decade.
The Spore neighborhood near Libreville's prison is a malaria hotspot. Campaigners trying to raise awareness of how to prevent the deadly disease have started their cleanup campaign here.
We urge the population to emulate the exercise we're carrying out today. They should do it every day. If we don't do it, our mothers or children will be exposed to malaria.
Professor Ategbo is the Help Center Coordinator at the Mother and Child University Teaching Hospital in Libreville, a pilot center which offers free testing for malaria. It also offers medical care for malaria to children up to 5 years old. This morning, Professor Ategbo is busy with consultations.
Malaria is the primary cause for consultations in children. About 12% of children who come here have malaria. The important thing here and the message we're trying to convey is that malaria is dangerous, especially for children.
After a rapid test, infected children are given artemisinin-based treatments. Artemisinin is a group of drugs used in the treatment of malaria. They are part of the National Anti-Malaria Program. The goal is to eradicate malaria in Gabon by 2030. But to do that takes money. After a 15-year ban from receiving funding for the treatment of malaria, Gabon got a whopping 4 billion francs CFA from the World Health Organization to fight tuberculosis, HIV/AIDS and malaria.
In our country, malaria is one of the biggest expenses for hospitals. We have to invest money and resources if we want to achieve our 2030 goals.
The national program for the fight against malaria has helped infection rates drop from 110 to 62 in every 1,000 inhabitants between 2019 and 2020. Though encouraging, experts say there is still a critical lack of funding holding back anti-malaria efforts.
South Africa will try again to withdraw from the International Criminal Court. On Tuesday, President Cyril Ramaphosa said that the decision came from the ruling ANC party. Just days earlier, the country's parliament had announced that it would drop a 7-year-long process to try to exit the ICC. As a member of the ICC, South Africa would technically be obliged to hand over Russian President Vladimir Putin if he attended a BRICS summit due to be held in South Africa in August. The ICC issued an arrest warrant for Putin in March over accusations the Kremlin unlawfully deported Ukrainian children. Now, in Uganda, Luwera wetland near Lake Victoria is an important aquatic breeding ground, stop for migratory birds and carbon dioxide sink. But sand miners are endangering the already fragile ecosystem. Olivia Bizot has more.
Every day, these workers load their trucks with sand extracted from the Luwera wetland. But their work is putting the fragile ecosystem in danger, and it's flooding nearby residential areas.
Water that used to flow through the river started spilling over into people's houses. Many residents were forced to flee and many houses collapsed. Sand mining is destroying our environment.
Companies are allowed to dig 4 kilometers into the earth. But many trucks have been digging deeper, according to local officials who are frustrated about the lack of regulation by the National Environment Management Authority, NEMA.
Put the blame on NEMA because they give licenses to work in swampy areas to make it legal for works to be done in swampy areas where NEMA would be protecting such environments. Now you find the local council, like local town council, cannot stop these guys because they have all their documents putting them in the area to do their work.
Meanwhile, NEMA insists that polluters are being punished.
Uganda needs sand, and every effort is being made to ensure that the sand is mined in a sustainable manner. If there are any illegalities, I have an express penalty scheme that charges money in billions of Uganda shillings if you're found to be degrading the environment.
Sand is the second most exploited resource in the world after water. In Uganda, the construction industry is demanding an increasing amount of this raw material.
And finally, a huge literary festival in Conakry is one of Guinea's biggest cultural events. 72 Hours of the Book has been running for 15 years now. This year's theme is Africa, Literature and Identity, a particularly important focus for a country where half the population is illiterate, and so a lot more work has to be done to make reading accessible. Our correspondents tell us more.
This is one of the few libraries in Guinea. The titles available at the Gamal Abdel Nasser University are mostly scientific and, according to the chief librarian, outdated.
We're in the medical section, urology, pediatrics. We have lots of books on medicine compared to other subjects. To balance things out, the state needs to come to the rescue, along with institutions and donors.
Until then, students have to make do with what is available. El-Aj Siddiqui Kaba is an undergrad physics student.
I do physics, so I need books about electronics that I can't find here, and there is also no digital department.
Guinea has a dozen publishing houses, most of which have limited funds. Bookstores mostly sell works imported from abroad at prices too high for most citizens. A book club in the capital is trying to keep the literary flame alive with twice-monthly meetings. Members are lent books for free and take part in group reading sessions, meaning illiterate people can also enjoy the literature.
Books are very expensive. Those of us from poor backgrounds don't have access to books. That's why we created this club, to help them. The more they read, the more they're able to emancipate themselves.
The National Association of Writers in Guinea have called on the government to invest more in the country's publishing sector.
That's it for Eye on Africa. Thanks for joining us. Do so again. Till then, take care.